salam kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe jalla salam kore gainalwe karmal salam kore gainalwe karmal salam kinna mal salam gainalwe adul mal salam gainalwe kinna mal salam gainalwe adul mal salam gainalwe annuj salam kore gainalwe annawi salam kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe jalla salam kore gainalwe karmal salam kore gainalwe karmal salam kore gainalwe طابول سلام بلبول سلام طابول سلام بلبول سلام ارمل سلام كره غاينالوي ارمل سلام كره غاينالوي حول حول كره غاينالوي حول حول كره غاينالوي يلا سلام كره غاينالوي ارمل سلام كره غاينالوي ارمل سلام أقول براغلي سلام أري راغلي سلام أقول براغلي سلام أري راغلي سلام أقول براغلي سلام أري راغلي سلام عندي مال سلام كره غاينالو إرندي مال سلام كره غاينالو كره غاينالو كره غاينالو kore gainalwe karmal salam kore gainalwe karmal salam kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe jental salam kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe jental salam kore gainalwe haul haule kore gainalwe jental salam kore gainalwe armal salam kore gainalwe hirmal salam kore gainalwe
General Muhammadu Buhari Allah ne baba. General Muhammadu Buhari Allah ne amin. Hairu se dumada, te mani mabotu. Ala rene sure hairu chami sanni ma baba. General Muhammadu Buhari Allah rene amin. President Owini hope na himbele di mede neja. Mobe hale barchi fulano bendo di ende neja. Owini hope na bera insuka bele di neja. Haru ho bele di, palli cho bele di. Jona jam tori mi Allah besta gendele di amin. General Muhammadu Buhari Allah rene amin. Wanganal owodi asli ndem owodi dina. Lanyal mabe dawra katina lanyal marangol barka. Bengodi dina ndem bengodi kautal hore. Owodi jawdi, owodi nagge, ndem owodi endam baba. General Muhammadu Buhari Allah rene amin. President Muhammadu Buhari gorko hajja Aisha Fasladi Nigeria de bongo berde hore dada Balito horo bebe hurbe o endi himbe mede Berti do debo Baba Shahi do debo Baba Alabes do hide amin. General Muhammadu Buhari Allah rene amin. President Buhari Nigeria kullum doso adali jo berde hore sandi guoda ala beste berde ngota ku albarkadina jona jam eledi neja jomi rawo beddu amin. President Buhari Nigeria alla beste hayru ala rene sure amin. Amin amin baba ala rene sure amin.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Good night to each and everyone. Yes,
General Muhammadu Buhari Allah
Amin.
rene baba.
yes. Assalamu alaikum. Good night to each and everyone. We there. Yeah, man. Things in time. Give me a cultured lick. Yes, people. The extension is on. We are losing close ones, friends, brethren, sisterins, and elders. So we send all our condolences to families, to the world, natural, to the world. So we have now till Friday, Ramadan feasibility. So we are tune out to tune in. You see, because we are Muslims. Yes. Fasting, we're going to let you into something. So for all the stresses that some people are having, natural, there is some light, God willing, if only you can try. You see? It's all about trying something. You see? And it's healthy. The way I'm going to explain it is healthy. It's healthy any which way. But the way I'm going to explain it, if you pay attention, you'll see, well, hey, it's not just logical, it's practical, it's feasible. So we're going back now to our African conditions and circumstances, because transition is what is been happening and what will continue to happen. And we have to inform our children why is they're with us, why is we're in the same space, that safe environment. And we must speak truth to reason, you see. So let's start the ball rolling now. Listen. We are going to the classroom, so just listen.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as the world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes equal results, because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside, and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle.
Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. So news came out today that the United States government plans to withdraw from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Now if you're wondering what is the Human Rights Council and why is that relevant to us, many of you might remember that Malcolm X was an avid supporter of Africans in America petitioning the United Nations in order to get recognition for the human rights abuses being done to Africans in America. And the body that he wanted to petition was, back then it was called the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, but now we call it the United Nations Human Rights Council. So just to recap a little bit about Malcolm and why this was his strategy. At that time, a lot of African nations had recently gotten their independence. They were also newly independent and didn't have as much neo-colonial forces keeping control of the economies of these countries. So at that time, it seemed reasonable when you see different countries getting their independence, different revolutionaries who were running these countries. And when I say revolutionaries, I mean people like Nkrumah and people like Toure. When you see all of this happening in the continent, it made sense that the Africans in America recognized that these states were independent and free, and therefore could possibly back them in order for the United States, for Africans in America to get their petition put into the United Nations. So at that time, that was his strategy. You had all of these liberated countries. Neocolonialism was not yet the dominant force in the continent of Africa, but at that time, Europe was scrambling to figure out how to regain control of Africa after colonialism had ended. So Malcolm had actually traveled to Africa and got the promise from a number of African countries that they would back him up if he took the grievances of the United States to the United Nations. Now, that is not necessarily going to work today for a number of reasons. As I said, at that particular time, whenever the countries were liberated or countries were independent, a lot of them were not being ran by neocolonial forces. A lot of them were newly independent, and while the countries in Europe were fighting to maintain control of those countries, they weren't so efficient yet. So we know today, for example, if a country in Europe wants to retain control of an African country, so we'll say retain control of Guinea, a lot of times they'll have a leader of the country who is picked by the West, and they will be communicating with those leaders, and they will be making deals with those leaders behind the backs of the citizens. So the citizens have no idea what's going on. They do not know when these United States companies or European companies are meeting with their elected officials. So this process is completely off the radar. And that is why it's so efficient, neocolonialism, because it is off the radar and not a lot of people can figure out exactly what deals are happening, what countries are involved, what businesses are involved. I mean, even for Boycott Togo, as some of you might know, we're trying to create a boycott of Togo in order to bring attention to the fact that not boycott Togo, boycott France. We're trying to create a boycott of France to bring attention to the fact that the French government is the government that's really backing the dictator in Togo who is oppressing his citizens. But even with something like that, it's very difficult to know exactly what corporations to boycott because so many corporations are completely hidden from our view. We can't call them out, we can't figure them out because all of this stuff is done in meetings that are completely unknown to the public. Now, because of this and neocolonialism's efficiency, and because the West has managed to wipe out African leaders who are revolutionary, we are in a position today where we are essentially without a liberated Africa. So Malcolm's strategy would not work in the sense of Africans in America getting African countries, most African countries, to back us, because a lot of these countries are have leaders who are in place that were placed there by the West, and so they are essentially controlled by the West. They are puppets of the West, similar to how a lot of Africans in America, we have leaders who are said to be people who speak for the whole black community, said to be people who want to distinguish universities and we should listen to their opinions because they know what's good for us. It tends to be that the people who get to these high positions, the people who have big positions in corporations, the people who try to speak for us the most and are given the platform by CNN or given a platform by MSNBC or Fox News or whatever, these people are always chosen by the power structure. So I would say look at that as analogous. The same way that we might look at these people and say, you don't represent us, you don't come to the black community, you don't speak the voice of the people. That's a similar thing as what's going on in Africa, because a lot of these people are placed there by Western powers, and therefore they're not representing their citizens, they're essentially representing the interest of the West. Now, even though Africa is not liberated, and really not as close to liberation as it was back in the 60s, does that mean that Malcolm's strategy is obsolete? I would say absolutely not. It's not obsolete because now we have a whole nother issue. And that is the issue of neocolonialism. Back whenever the United Nations started recognizing African countries, they admitted that colonialism was wrong, although they still allowed the practices of colonialism, such as places like Puerto Rico and other places. But while they admitted that the colonialism was wrong, they weren't willing to enforce those that they were willing. While they admitted that colonialism was wrong, there was no need to enforce colonialism being wrong because the West at least was saying that they were no longer colonizing countries. But the United Nations has never ever stood up against neocolonialism. And if all the things that the United Nations say is a big issue. For example, they have groups that solve issues as far as women's issues, groups that solve issues as far as children, poverty, healthcare. All of these are supposedly important issues to the United Nations. Why would they not talk about the issue that is at the heart of it, and that is neocolonialism? Neocolonialism is what causes there to be a culture in these countries, and not just a culture, but an economic landscape where these people are deprived of all of their necessities. They're deprived of the resources that are in their own country, and that is really what creates the conditions that United Nations is saying that they want to solve. If they want to solve poverty in Africa, then why would you not talk about the fact that the West is the one that's causing Africa to be poor? Why would you not condemn the United States, condemn Europe, condemn China now more and more? Why would you not condemn those powers as doing something illegal? So that's the problem with the United Nations right now. They don't recognize neocolonialism as a force, as an economic force that is causing people to live in these conditions. They would rather talk about the conditions that are created. For example, you could talk about issues in the communities in America. You could say, well, there's issues with fatherless homes, or there's issues with people robbing each other. But if you're not willing to deal with the heart of those issues, which a lot of it is psychological, but a lot of it is economic, then you're just talking about the issues that are going to happen repeatedly, and no one's going to solve them. No one's going to address them, because no one's talking about what is really what is the heart of these issues and what is really causing our people to suffer. So now here are some reasons why this United Nations ruling, or their decision, is still dismal, because I do think that Africans internationally, we have an opportunity to organize ourselves in such a way that even though the United Nations has basically said they're not going to be a system of force, because let's be serious, a lot of the countries that are in the United Nations and the most vocal countries are the worst human rights abusers. So even though they're not going to condemn themselves and prosecute themselves, we still have an opportunity, especially with social media, especially with information, to publicly condemn them and condemn them as one force. So it is dismal that the United Nations has lost the United States as a party inside of their commission, because if we don't have one of the worst human rights abusers in the commission, how do we get these issues addressed? How do we bring them to the forefront when the United States is incarcerating millions of African people in America, and then the United States goes in other countries and commits total sabotage on those economies, whether it be Haiti, whether it be different African nations? The United States is the worst imperialist, and China is coming right up behind. So an article was published by Bloomberg about this issue says that the Trump administration plans to announce its plans to withdraw from the United Nations Human Rights Council on Tuesday, making good on a pledge to leave a body it has long accused of hypocrisy and criticized as biased against Israel. So I'm going to stop right there. Obviously, this is the whole statement just doesn't make sense. Number one, I don't know of the United Nations Human Rights Council being biased against Israel, because if anything, Israel has been allowed to exist on someone else's land, taking someone else's land and basically committing genocide on those people. So I don't know how in the world that you have gotten this idea that the United Nations is biased against Israel. If anything, they're biased for Israel, because really all of the actions that are being committed by the Israeli government against the Palestinians, and not just against the Palestinians, but against many African people. There have been African people that have immigrated to Israel and are facing deportation. There have been African people that have immigrated who would like to immigrate to Israel. There's a Ugandan group of Jewish people who are asking for recognition of their Judaism as Judaism, and Israel has said, we're not going to recognize you as Judaism, because essentially that would let the Ugandan Jews have access to the land that they claim is theirs. So they're very biased for Israel, and the fact that they're not calling out all of these human rights atrocities, the people, the thousands and thousands of Palestinians that are being killed by Israeli forces, obviously the occupation, the inhumane treatment, the disgusting things that have been done to the Palestinians and to Africans and anyone really who is not of European Jewish descent who tries to claim rights to that to the Israeli homeland. Now, it goes on to say that the 47-member council, created in 2006 and based in Geneva, began its latest session on Monday with a broadside against President Donald Trump's immigration policy by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He called the policy of separating children from parents crossing the southern border illegally unconscionable. Now, I think it's interesting that that is what prompted so much discussion. Obviously, it's horrible what's being done to immigrant families, being separated from children, the parents being separated from children being kept in cages, and there's been photos that corroborate the statements that have been said that this is actually happening. But it's interesting that that is being called out right now when we know that the United States has a very long history of separating families. We know that the United States has a very long history of inhumanely treating children. The foster system has a long history of separating families of African descent. The prison system has a long history of separating families of African descent, but also of unfairly imprisoning parents and children. I mean, just recently we're starting to get some type of juvenile reform, but still a lot of juveniles are kept inside of these systems and being treated as adults, even though they don't have the mental capacity to act as an adult, to think as an adult, to do anything that an adult, any responsibility that an adult would have to this country. So to treat them as an adult, totally denies their capacity and totally disregards their biological state. So the United States has been doing this for a long time, but the media essentially chooses specific scenarios in order to try to bring attention to things that are being done. I would argue that the media intentionally picks scenarios and picks instances that are happening that are not going to affect the mass of Americans. Because while there are some people who are being separated from their children, undoubtedly, there's many more people that are being separated from their children in prison than are being separated at these borders. So the article goes on to say the U.S. withdrawal comes as little surprise. National Security Advisor John Bolton opposed the body's creation when he was a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in 2006. In a speech to the council last year, Haley called out the body for what he said was relentless pathological campaign against Israel. She also urged expelling members of the council that have pure human rights abuse records themselves. Other members include China, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. So the funny thing about this to me, of course, is I really do think that what the United States has done as far as imperialism and then also just things domestically, I don't think we completely understand how crazy it is, how many people are incarcerated in this country. The unfathomable numbers, mostly of African people. The total separation of children and the total destroying of neighborhoods and communities. I don't think we totally understand just how serious these things are. So the United States is, to me, the worst human rights abuser. And it does it more efficiently than anyone else because they can do so while pretending to be humane. They can do so while sending peace courts to different countries or sending aid to other countries, and we know that aid can certainly be loans that are going to have very high interest rates and put these same countries in debt. So the idea that the United States wants to withdraw from the council because there are other countries that commit human rights abuses, in spite of the United States having some of the worst human rights abuse records, and I would say the worst historically, when you look all the way back to obviously enslaving Africans, but also wiping out an entire population of people in order to build a civilization on this land, dropping the atomic bombs. I mean, just the history of this country is bloodshed after bloodshed. The fact that the United States has the nerve to say that other countries should not be in this council because they have horrible human rights abuses just shows the hypocrisy and I would say the pathology of racism. If you're not killing people who are European, then the pathology of racism really makes you feel like you're still good. You could kill African people, you could kill Native Americans, you can kill Palestinians, but you're still good because you're not killing people who look like European or who are European, or of European descent. So the idea that you have a moral superiority, it's very documented throughout history. The same way you'll have people lynching African people, yet these same people will fight against you if you try to touch one of their children or whatever. They feel like they have the moral stance to do that because in the pathology of racism, you really do believe that black is bad and white is good, and therefore, whenever you do bad by black, you are completely justified. So, lastly, the article says that the Trump administration's withdrawal is a sad reflection of its one-dimensional human rights policy. Defending Israeli abuses from criticism takes precedence above all else. Human Rights Watch Executive Director Kenneth Roth said in a statement, other governments will have to redouble their efforts to ensure the Council addresses the world's most serious human rights problems. So basically, now that the United States has withdrawn from the Council, you're going to have the country that is so self-righteous and wants to basically be involved with defining what is wrong, what is a human rights abuse. Well, they're not going to be so active anymore. And undoubtedly, whenever you have people who live in those countries and reside in those countries bringing the abuses of the United States, so for example us, to the attention of the United Nations, the United States has more of a reason to essentially ignore the rules of the United Nations. Now, I'm sure this will just be a matter of an administration change, as most things are, which is why you shouldn't get too wrapped into the things that happen in Washington politics, at least, because those politics tend to go one way quickly and go the other way quickly, which is why you shouldn't put all of your money and all of your chance of liberation into litigation or policies, because those policies are easily reversed with an administration change. But at the same time, it is concerning if we are going to move towards the dream of Malcolm, and that is to organize African people to bring the charges of the United States against the United Nations. But it's not too concerning to me for a number of reasons. One, even if the United Nations was inside of the Human Rights Council, even African people getting together to bring those charges to the United Nations, I don't think that would have too much of an effect as far as the United Nations actually acting on the charges. However, for people who look like us in the United Nations, that could have an effect. And that could have an effect of people being able to call out the United States whenever the United States wants to point the finger at them and say that they have bad human rights atrocities. It's just as powerful to say, well, you have bad human rights atrocities, so you should be able to treat your people better, and then maybe we'll treat our people better. So that's where the power lies, and I think the power would lie more so in education and inside of organization, organizing Africans, African governments, African people, African organizations to understand our human rights and understand that we should be calling out the United States for their human rights. And I really think that an ideological campaign waged against United States media that said that they're so liberal or progressive, but they're quickly turn a blind eye to neocolonialism and different policies of countries in Europe, waging a real educational campaign in order to organize resistance, that can ultimately have the real effect. Maybe not getting the United Nations as a body to go out and say and condemn the United States, or actually not just condemn the United States, but act on their condemnation of the United States, but actually getting African people and other people of color who have been victims of imperialism and colonialism to gather together and understand that the abuses of this country and of European countries are so atrocious and yet so hypocritical as far as what they say that they stand for. Therefore, we should organize and be able to, even if the United Nations won't recognize the human rights, let's recognize them among ourselves and organize in that capacity, and then find a way to link our resistance to each other. So that's all I have for this article. I'd love to know what you think. Are you like me? Do you think that the United Nations really doesn't mean much as far as actually doing things? But that doesn't diminish the importance of the United Nations, because again, it is useful to have standards, human rights standards that should be adhered to, but also to bring education to the people about the fact that the United States is in complete violation of many human rights abuses or human rights treaties that they have signed themselves. So that's all I have, and I'll see you on another video.
Minister Malcolm, I'd like to know why you place so much emphasis on calling the freedom struggle among Afro-Americans in this country a struggle for human rights rather than civil rights.
Well, most of our people don't even know the meaning of civil rights, and by not knowing what it is they're actually trying to get, it has eluded us for the past 100 years. Civil rights is supposed to mean citizenship. When you have civil rights, you have citizenship. When you have citizenship, you have civil rights. And if the 22 million Afro-Americans were actually citizens of this country, it wouldn't be necessary to pass any kind of additional legislation to include us in the Constitution. If you notice, whenever the people come here from Europe, they can come here from Poland, which is a communist country. They don't need any legislation to make this Polish person a citizen. They don't need any additional civil rights legislation to make the refugees from Hungary who come here citizens. They don't need any additional legislation to make anyone who comes to this country a citizen. But when it comes to the rights of the black people who are the descendants of slaves, then immediately new legislation is necessary. So this right here implies that when the Constitution was written, in some way or other, it must have excluded those of us who were slaves at that time. And because we were excluded from the Constitution when it was originally written, today they have to amend it in order to include us. But if you notice, the Civil War didn't include us in the Constitution. Had the Civil War Constitution, we would be citizens today. Had the amendments even to the Constitution actually included us, we would be citizens today. If the Supreme Court desegregation decision way back in 1954 was sufficient to include us into the jurisdiction of the Constitution, all of our problems would be solved today. So there's something about civil rights that makes it almost impossible for us to get it. So you have to know the difference between civil rights and human rights. As long as our people are begging for civil rights, or they are labeling their struggle for freedom, justice, and equality under the label of civil rights, then what they do is leave us in the jurisdiction of Uncle Sam's courts. And it's actually Uncle Sam who is guilty of all of the violation of our rights that have taken place in this country. So when you go to Uncle Sam to try and get some kind of redress over civil rights violations, you're taking your case to the man who's responsible for the violation. So the only way our people can really get some meaningful results, it has to be taken out of Uncle Sam's hands and taken into a world court. And the world court that has been set up to listen to the complaints of human rights violations is in the United Nations. Human rights are international, and civil rights come within the jurisdiction of the countries where these rights are violated. Some people may wonder why our brothers from Africa and Asia have not spoken out more boldly or without compromise on the injustices that the 22 million Afro-Americans experience in this country. They can't speak out. As long as these injustices are labeled by us as civil rights, then this remains a domestic issue, and none of our people from abroad, because of protocol, can become involved in Uncle Sam's domestic problems. So all the civil rights groups have to do is expand the struggle from civil rights to human rights. And once it is expanded to the level of human rights, then this puts us in a position to charge Uncle Sam with violating the UN Charter on Human Rights. We can take it before the United Nations, and other nations of this earth can then side with us and indict Uncle Sam for the mistreatment of 22 million Afro-Americans. The very fact that the struggle of the black people in South Africa, or I should say the injustices that have been experienced by black people in South Africa has come before the UN, or the injustices experienced by our own people again in Angola has been brought before the UN. Even the oppression of the Hungarians has been brought before the UN. The plight of the Jews in Soviet Russia, and there's only 3 million of them in Russia, has been brought before the UN. Well, then why hasn't the problem of the 22 million Afro-Americans come before the United Nations? It has not come before them because the leaders of the civil rights struggle don't understand what civil rights actually amount to. When they are mature to the point where they can see that their present struggle has kept them under Uncle Sam's jurisdiction, and Uncle Sam is not morally capable of solving this problem, then they will shift it out of the courts of Uncle Sam and take it to the courts of the United Nations on the level of human rights, and we'll get some kind of meaningful results. As long as we keep it at the civil rights level, we alienate the support of our brothers and sisters in Africa and Asia. But when we shift it to the level of human rights, we have the support of billions of black, brown, red, and yellow people from all over this earth behind us.
The United States is a great world power and has in the past exercised a lot of control and power within the United Nations. So how can you expect to wage a successful battle against such a powerful country in a world court?
Well, whenever you believe in what the United States has taught us concerning democracy, which means one voice, one vote, this is good, because in the present world setup, world governmental setup, as is represented by the United Nations, each country there has one vote, which means that no matter how wealthy a nation is, it only has one vote. And no matter how poor a nation is, it still has one vote. So the ballot actually equalizes the poor man and the rich man. Back when the United Nations was set up, it consisted largely of white nations, because most of the dark nations were then colonized and weren't independent. Since the dark nations have gained their independence and have emerged on the scene, today in the UN you have more dark nations who are in a position to vote in a bloc than you have white nations. So that we have a situation now where the grouping together of the dark nations who formerly were colonized has given them enough political power to offset the military power and prestige of these mighty white nations of the West. And it is their support. It is only in the United Nations, where everyone has the ballot, where everyone has equal vote, that the plight of the black man can be given a just hearing, and the weight of the dark world can come down on our side and balance the scale on our side. But whenever you take it into the white man's court, you never will get justice, because the white man is the guilty one who committed the crime in the first place. It's like taking your case from the wolf to the fox to take it to Washington, D.C.
I don't think I wholeheartedly go along with that, Mr. Malcolm. I have some appreciation for your discussion as regards to the human right and the civil right. But here in America, as a band of Negroes, I think the most progressive thinking that we could possibly attain is civil rights. This is the thing that we want. This is the thing that we hope to get. This is the thing that we're going out to fight for. Without our civil rights, the human rights, and the rest of the elements are non-entities as far as
human rights come before civil rights.
That may be so, but the civil rights are an important factor.
You can never get civil rights until you have human rights. Human rights represent the right to be a human being. Whenever you are respected and recognized as a human being, your civil rights are automatic.
But if we get civil rights, we are human beings.
No, you have to get the recognition of human rights first. This is why people can come here from Africa and Asia and immediately are able to benefit from what the Constitution stands for, because they are recognized as a human being when they touch the shores of North America. But the black people in this country, all of our human characteristics were destroyed by slavery. Our language was destroyed. Our history was destroyed. Our culture was destroyed. And then the white man taught us that we were savages in the jungle and living at a subhuman level. And for this reason, when they put the Constitution together, they classified our people as 3/5 of a man, which meant subhuman, not a complete human being. And once our human characteristics were completely destroyed, this gave them justification for treating us like we were animals. And it also justified their selling us from plantation to plantation like you sell a horse and a cow and a bag of wheat. Why, George Washington himself historically is on record as having sold or having traded a black man for a keg of molasses, which shows you he didn't regard that black man as a human being. If the black man's human rights had been respected, he never could have been a slave here in America. And if his human rights had been restored by the Emancipation Proclamation, automatically we would have been citizens right after the Civil War. So we must be regarded as human. Our human rights must be respected before we can ever be regarded as citizens and our civil rights be respected.
Thank you, Mr. President. To its shame, the United Nations has long been a hostile place for the state of Israel. Both the current and the previous Secretary Generals have objected to the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel. It's a wrong that undermines the credibility of this institution, and that in turn is harmful for the entire world. I've often wondered why, in the face of such hostility, Israel has chosen to remain a member of this body. And then I remember that Israel has chosen to remain in this institution because it's important to stand up for yourself. Israel must stand up for its own survival as a nation, but it also stands up for the ideals of freedom and human dignity that the United Nations is supposed to be about. Standing here today, being forced to defend sovereignty and the integrity of my country, the United States of America, many of the same thoughts have come to mind. The United States is by far the single largest contributor to the United Nations and its agencies. We do this in part in order to advance our values and our interests. When that happens, our participation in the UN produces great good for the world. Together, we feed, clothe, and educate desperate people. We nurture and sustain fragile peace in conflict areas throughout the world. And we hold outlaw regimes accountable. We do this because it represents who we are. It is our American way. But we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. When a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. Unlike in some UN member countries, the United States government is answerable to its people. As such, we have an obligation to acknowledge when our political and financial capital is being poorly spent. We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways. Those are the thoughts that come to mind when we consider the resolution before us today. The arguments about the President's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem have already been made. They are by now well known. The decision was in accordance to U.S. law dating back to 1995, and its position has been repeatedly endorsed by the American people ever since. The decision does not prejudge any final status issues, including Jerusalem's boundaries. The decision does not preclude a two-state solution if the parties agree to that. The decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, the President's decision reflects the will of the American people and our right as a nation to choose the location of our embassy. There is no need to describe it further. Instead, there is a larger point to make. The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered. Thank you.
US Ambassador Nikki Haley came here determined to thwart a resolution drafted by Kuwait that called for measures to protect the people of Gaza. She tried persuasion, going around other members of the Security Council. Here, as she approached the ambassador of Peru, she can be seen mouthing the word please. A warm greeting for Israel's ambassador, Danny Danon. He, surely aware, she also had procedural tricks up her sleeve. She wanted her completely rewritten version of the resolution classed as an amendment so it would be voted on first. There were heated discussions among ambassadors, but this month's president of the council, Russia, ruled against her. And things only got worse for Haley. She pleaded with council members to support her draft resolution and reject Kuwait's.
We strongly encourage this council to vote against Kuwait's resolution and acknowledge the concerns of Hamas by voting for the U.S. resolution. Each of you have a choice. You either support Hamas or not. This vote will tell the story.
But the story that unfolded was not the one Haley wanted. When Kuwait's draft was put to a vote, it got 10 votes in favour. It only didn't pass because Haley had to use her veto. And then the second vote on Haley's own resolution. This is where all her tactics backfired. Her allies abstained, others voted against, and a moment of diplomatic humiliation. She was the only person to vote for her resolution.
I don't believe that there was in the history of the United States, in the history of the United Nations, in which a country to submit a draft resolution and not to receive except one single vote, the vote of the party that did submit that draft resolution. If that is not the epic of complete failure, I want you to tell me what is failure in the Security Council. Thank you.
It was a bad day for Ambassador Haley, but the real losers are the people of Palestine, particularly in Gaza. With the Security Council divided and deadlocked, there is no end to their misery in sight. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
Dear Ghana, I used to have mixed feelings about you. I used to hate you for keeping my parents away, but loved you for the warm breeze and sun ray you used to welcome me. Even your winters felt like summer to me. I used to hate those hours in the dark because of Dumso. And as a kid, I couldn't understand how you swept my father's heart away. I simply couldn't make him stay. Dear Ghana, I know I didn't choose to be a part of you. And as a member of the diaspora, I spent most of my years apart from you. I nonetheless choose to be proud of you. I remember when I came to Ghana, I was brought back to memory lane. It was so sweet, it reminded me of the taste of sugarcane. I could even remember the sensation of the heat. When I came to Ghana, my heart was swept away. Not by a man, but by the land. By the beautiful view on the Foricom Rock. The calm cruise on Lake Bosomtwe. And those Mona monkeys I wish I could make my own. Oh yes, my dear Ghana, you rock. Dear Ghana, I know you're not perfect, but I'm still proud of you. I'm proud because when people see us, they see us as the black stars. And when they can't see us, they hear us to the beautiful rhythm of our Afro beats. And I swear you can make a heart skip a beat. Dear Ghana, I remember when Asamoah broke my heart on the 2nd of July, the night prior to my birthday, with that heartbreaking missed goal that almost broke me apart. And ever since that day, I promised myself never to allow my heart to be so deeply involved in the game, to avoid another experience of such pain. Dear Ghana, I can hear you cry. I can hear you cry about the cracks in the roads. I can hear you cry through the voice of the youth, screaming out loud, unemployment is real. We've got the degree, but still ain't got no deal. So we're going to church, praying for God to provide our next meal. Dear Ghana, I hear you, but let me remind you that you're still a work in progress. It's been 61 years and you're still heading for success. Dear Ghana, I'm proud. I'm proud of the men like Kwame Nkrumah, Jerry Rawlings, Kofi Annan, and Nana Akufo-Addo who are part of our story. I'm proud of the women who helped shape our history. Women like Hannah Kojo, Ama Ata Edo, and Yasantua who led our men to war because reclaiming the golden stool would have been our sign of victory. And Theodosia Ako, to whom we own the colors and the designs of our flag. Dear Ghana, I'm proud. I'm proud that you're able to keep your elections peaceful, because each time we hear about elections and re-elections, we tremble. Dear Ghana, although I've had mixed feelings about you, I've always kept you close to me. Whether it was through a tama around my hips, or the sweet sounds of tree that flowed from my lips, I've always been proud. And God forbid, but if with old age I lose my memory, my soul will remain proud, because you'd still be a part of my history. So I guess there's only one thing left for me to say, and that is, Happy Independence Day.
The thing is that, as far as I'm concerned, since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. It's true. I mean, where will the whole Western world be without Africa? Our cocoa, our timber, our gold, our diamonds, our platinum, our whatever. Everything you are is us. I am not saying it, it's a fact. And in return for all of this, what have we got? Nothing. Anti-personnel indoctrination against ourselves. If you go and cook your horrible diseases like AIDS, you say it is us. You brought us tuberculosis. We didn't have this big cough until white people came here. In exchange for Africa giving Europe 500 solid years of our people, I mean not Europe, the Western world, of our human beings to work your canes, to dig your gold, to take in gold itself, diamond, I mean, you know, fish, peanuts, palm oil, everything. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it. nothing. And you look upon, white folks look upon us like monkeys. It is true. It's in your literature. Hey, some of your best thinkers have said this about us. Have you heard of all these Germans? Have you heard? Okay. Yes. They said, Lord Burton, people like that, they said, we don't even have the brain of animals. That's what we've got from you people.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over? Who said that 8 came from the green monkey? Is it over? Is it over?
Well, if this is your impression, do you think that you can ever forgive us?
It's not a question of forgiveness. I have nothing against you. My point is that you did and you are doing for your survival what is necessary. We can't blame you for that. The fact that we didn't do enough for our own survival and we are still not doing enough for our survival, that is not your problem. Even everybody that God has created has a sense of survival, and if we don't develop it, we can't blame white people. You came here because you needed these things. You took gunpowder from the Chinese. You needed them to shoot people.
Do not be deluded that the world is full of benevolent individuals and institutions whose only claim to fame is that they want to lift Africa from the morass that she now finds herself in. The reality is the poverty of Africa is the glory of some civilizations. Poverty is an industry. Ignorance is an industry, a big industry. And there are those who want Africa to continue to wallow in poverty and to wallow in ignorance because it is their safest bet to their continued benefit.
Yes, education and violation of human rights and transitioning. We must face up to these things, recognize these things, and do not let them pass us by. You see? We have to be serious once we come out of this pandemic. What is the way forward? And the diaspora, people are waiting for it. You understand? And we have to do something before something does. And we have to avoid sabotage. Yes.
There's a light in the darkness, golden light as black as my skin. There's a light burning bright, showing me the way. But I know where I've been. But the riches will be plenty. But the risk and the chance we have to take. There's pride in our hearts to lift us up to tomorrow. 'Cause justice and still will be rising. I know where I'm going. Where I've been.
That's true. You understand? So that's us. We know where we've been. We don't know where we're going. We know where we would like to be. We got trapped in this darkness, and God willing, we'll come out. So Ramadan, feasibility, Friday, yes, should be. Once we see the moon, inshallah, the first day of fasting will commence on Friday, the 24th of April, God willing. So Ramadan will start from, the fast will start. You see, we have a start time and a finish time. It's not a race. Remember me tell you that, right? One should finish any water, any food, any substance by 4:25. That's when Fajr feasibility starts. So that's 4:25. Food should finish. So we say 4:13, yeah? Because you have to prepare yourself. No rushing and all them something there. So 4:13, Sukoor, done. Right? The fast finishes that first day at 15 minutes past 8 o'clock, 8:15. On Saturday, it'll be 8:20. On Sunday, it'll be 8:19. On Monday, it'll be 8:20. So there's a minute. You understand? So, but the start time is the start time is 4:13. So what I'm saying is, if a person now, we're under lockdown, and there are people out there that do not see Al-Islam as their way of life, You can try fasting. If you fast right now, things tight, so you're tight in your belt. And if you just try fast, it's for a benefit of the self, of the body, of the mind, of the character, the well-being. And at the same time, the funds that is not there, or that is stretching, is tight, one would retain some of that. So if you take the financial aspect out of the thing and look at the benefit that can be gained and an effort that one puts in to look after themselves, because fasting, no one will think. You become very mentally, spiritually structured, and you think. And all actions and movements would be so refined. Some people would astonish themselves. Others would see that astonishment in yourself. So whichever way it turns is not a show-off, is not a thing, is to gain something. And I would testify, anyone who makes the attempt will gain something, not starvation. You will gain something mentally and spiritually. Physically also. The body would naturally detox. It will naturally detox. It'd be stupid for me to say that you would not, any person who have never done would not feel hungry and what they would say starving. When you see your mind, let your mind be your own placebo, our own placebo. Huh? And yes, we will recognize that is something we can do. So it's not like you have the food and you starve yourself. Because the Muslims, we have the food. We have the resource. And we will fast voluntarily, feasibly, for Allah's pleasure and for our eternal and internal benefit, spiritually, physically, morally. We will do that. We will do that and join upon ourselves the reading of the Quran throughout the day, 1/30. And now we are all at home, in a boat, wherever, flat house, some apartment. We will indulge in that. We will. Millions upon millions will do that because there's no work. And even those who are going have some work to do are able to attend wherever. They will still read because that's what we generally occupy ourselves in doing during Ramadan. Outside and now will be also during Ramadan. You see, so the families will naturally now have circles in them house, parents along with their children. See, beautiful situations going to be developed, beautiful scenery, beautiful situations because we're there. People who are not and do not see Al-Islam, them should try these things. You don't lose anything. You gain. You will gain something. So even if one try to fast 3 days out of the week, you have done something good for yourself, for your temple. You have done something good morally. You have done something good spiritually. And you have done something good physically. And the only thing that benefits is the individual. Not me, not some other Muslim brother or sister. It's the individuals. We all benefit from fasting during the month of Ramadan, feasibility. So make an attempt and see if anyone can do 3 days, do 5 days, you know? Yes, because it's new. Could you imagine the children of Israel, Bani Israel, in the wilderness? The first task was 40 days and 40 nights. And the last one, true punishment, was 40 years. You see? You can challenge your pastor on that because about living is what they don't want to talk about. They want to talk about tithing, talk about Peter, Matthew, Mark, and John, and all these peoples. You see? When they should put a brighter aspect on the thing, how to live. How to live. And many of them know, due to this pandemic, I've recognized that, you know. I've recognized that. And they know that them can't start prophesying nothing because they never said nothing beforehand. What they be doing was be making assumptions and trying to make people see something through their own vision. And that, in this time, that be wrong because what you're saying is, this one slipped me. So I got to find a way of saying that this is revelation. This has been prophesied. All of these things should not happen. We're human beings. Leave it alone and move on and just said that we have to pray and ask God for us to get out to the other side of this darkness. Realize, yes, there's light, but the darkness and the light is not what we're seeing. Because we don't know nothing. We're just being told some things. You see, so we should be praying earnestly and ask God Almighty to aid the earth and forgive our faults and to replenish our lives and all those around about us. Not just be selfish. And I saw black people still, African people, we're caring people. So that's my thing. Don't become prejudiced now. You see that the vision that I'm exploring is different. So we pray. Thursday, I tell you, Christ was exploring to his disciples how they should pray, how they should prepare themselves to pray. For he saw that they weren't, not just them, the people round about. For they've changed. That's why he had to come. They've changed. They changed. All the work that Moses did and Joshua, they changed. This is people, human beings. They take the very place that that they established to meet and discuss, them turn it into a money laundering place. And instead of propagating and projecting what is good from God Almighty that they had in their possessions, they created philosophies, new strategies. That's what they did. So his contention with them was about what they were practicing. And are you upholding to the laws? Because now you can see they're breaking them in what they're supposed to be doing throughout the week, certain intervals, what them supposed to be doing in meeting, how them supposed to exchange and sell and buy and so forth. So they weren't adhering to laws and any forms of disciplines. Neither were they praying and acknowledging and giving thanks to the Almighty. You see? So Tuesday, Thursday, inshallah, we'll go there. I think we'll start early because 8 o'clock, 7 minutes past 8 is Maghrib prayer, Salat to Maghrib. That's why I start these time, because I don't want to start, feel away, and then fade into my prayer time, because nobody now give me. So Thursday, yeah, the prayer time on Thursday, Maghrib, is 14 minutes past 8. So if me come in all about 5 o'clock, because one have to prepare themselves now Thursday night, make Toba, contact people, during this month of Ramadan, during this next 3 days, we have to contact people, make Toba to these people, find out if there's any debts, outstanding debts, if there's any animosities. We have to have a clean slate before we go into fasting, feasibility. I tell you. You understand? Despite the fact we have to take care of ourselves, we have to tank up with us now. We have to have things here. You understand? In our homes. You understand? So this pandemic make a lot of people do a whole heap of things that's similar. You understand? So one most important thing, we have to make sure that we don't go into the fast and we have people that we have offended or we owe something to. We have to take care of all of them things there. Everything that's humane, we have to sort it out. If there was a situation, and if that's linger in the mind, they have to make that approach, right? Despite the people them say that we are in a lockdown, we have to just get out there, get on the phone. We have to make that work, because our fast is not legitimate. That's how Al-Islam is. You understand? So it's a big thing. So we I say to you now, guidance, salam alaikum. Now you see something different. The ayah, the surah that the person was using, that they might try to think say he, a surah Al-Ikhlas, Kul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. On Thursday, we finished that because we just took you straight into Mali. I took you into Sudan. I took you into Nubia. I took you into Nigeria. I took you into Ethiopia. I took you into Ethiopia, yeah, because I was just going to say Eritrea, but Ethiopia, Eritrea and Ethiopia, Nubia, Nigeria, Mali, Sierra Leone, Ghana, yeah, you understand? And also Uganda, you see? Yeah, man, Africa, you see? That's where we went. And the Nigerian one, where I say for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show his mercy and blessing and give good health to Muhammad Buhari, the president. You understand? Some people would have said, wait, what? But him have the position. You understand? So if another person have the position, we ask for the same thing for them. You see? So we'll go here now, God willing, I will drop you Jacob Crucial Miller, Healing of the Nation, because when I think so, I'm gone, yes?
Please, Mr. Minister, a word with you. Only take a minute, sir. So don't.
You see all them with the music that was played earlier on, are African, you know. And you see some of them sound like Minto, yes? Are African, you see? And the Ugandan are children, are young children, them are play the instruments, yes. Sudan but the same, you understand? Yeah, man, Africa sweet and deep, yeah, wide, spectrum great. And they're all Muslims. I have to throw that inside there, yeah.
You screw, you no fight against the rum man, you no fight against the wine, you no fight against the cigarette smoking, yet you know these things give cancer, yet you know these things give cancer. Rasta man know the truth, so you can't fool the youth. Rasta man know the truth, so you can't fool the youth. What was hidden from the wise and prudent shall reveal to the babe and suckling. What was hidden from the wise and prudent shall reveal to the babe and suckling. Tell me why do you fight against the Kaliman? Tell me why do you fight against the Kaliman? Yet you know it's the healing of the nation. Yet you know it's the healing of the nation. Tell me why do you fight against the Kaliman? Tell me why do you fight against the Kaliman? Yet you know it's the healing of the nation. Yes, you know it's the healing of the nation. Yeah, nah. Too much partialism in this business, yeah. Guys, Shalimali, 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 shalimali. Shalimali. Shalimali, 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 shalimali. Shalimali, 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 shalimali. Shalimali, 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 shalimali. None shall escape the judgment in this time. These words I sing to all mankind. None shall escape the judgment in this time. These words I sing to all mankind. Arise, black man, Jehovah has come forward into Babylon. Yeah, to declare equal rights and justice among the heathen. Yes, the weak out must fall, only the righteous shall stand in this congregation.
Jah say, I will always do. Anything Jah say, I will always do, because I love him. Oh, because I love him. I love him, I'll serve him all the days of my life. In the house of the Lord, God Rastafari. I love him, I'll serve him all the days of my life. In the house of the Lord, God Rastafari. Oh, 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 oh. Shalimani, 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 shalimani. Shalimani, 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 shalimani. As I approach the gates of Zion, I can hear the choir singing. As I approach the gates of Zion, I can hear the choir singing. I love him, I'll serve him all the days of my life. In the house of the Lord, God Rastafari. I love him, I'll serve him all the days of my life. In the house of the Lord, God Rastafari. Shalimani, Shaliman, 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 Shaliman. None shall escape the judgment in this time. These words I sing to one.
We must never let anyone tell us or tell our children that our struggle has been obsolete, or that Malcolm speeches and his biography is obsolete, or Marcus Garvey is obsolete. No, we should put up a stern defense, but that can only happen if we ourselves are explaining, informing, educating proper to our children and our brethren and sisterins with action. Not just regurgitating, but with action. To build something, to develop something. And we must also project to them transitioning. Especially parents should be now explaining very carefully about transitioning. Because in this dark shade that we're in, no one knows, still knows anything, and no one knows what could happen to us. You see a life of a Muslim, you have to mentally, physically, spiritually prepare for death. Because it's ultimate. And a science, it's the ultimate. That's what will happen. Sometimes my wife just threw it at me too much. But it's evident. It will happen. So that transition, we should be discussing, communicating, explaining a journey, a life form to our children. Because them have to carry the baton. We can't just leave them in stagnation and just live our life like a fleeting moment and have not accomplished nothing, but we try run down vanity. Assalamu alaikum. And truth is very important, extremely important. So Thursday, obsolete, truth, and yes, truth, transition, obsolete, and truth. We'll just explore that because it's very important how we view ourselves and our family, our children, and what we are actually portraying. Because it's not the man, can't you see? It's not the man that we're dealing with. We seem to know so much about them, and we know very little about ourselves. And what little we know about ourselves, we not apply and implement them things at all. You see? So out of this pandemic, it's a lot of lessons learned, should have been. You understand? Things and time, lesson learned. I tell you, check time. Forget the watch and the clock. See if you understand time. Really and truly, see if you understand time. Guidance, gone.